problem without a solution.
Wake up, wake up.
America is already great.
Wake up, wake up. Wake up, wake up.
When they go low, we go high.
That's our motto. We want freedom by any means necessary.
Wake up. The front page with Dominic DePrima is on. News, knowledge, and your voice. The views and opinions expressed on the front page are not necessarily those of Taxi Productions or KJLH. Rise, shine, and stay woke. It's the front page with Dominic DePrima on Radio Free 102.3 KJLH.
You dare to struggle, you dare to win. You dare not to struggle if you don't deserve to win.
Wake up, wake up.
Wake up, wake up. Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the front page on 102.3 Radio Free KJLH. My name is Starlett Quarles, and I am filling in again for Miss Dominique DePrima, who will be back on January 8th, 2018. If you have been tuning in this week, then you know that we have been celebrating Kwanzaa by addressing a topic that is relevant to each principle. And this week, we will be discussing the first four principles. Today is day 3. Ujima, or collective work and responsibility. And the topic that we will be tackling is empowering today's young black males. And tomorrow we'll conclude our Kwanzaa series on day 4, Ujama, or cooperative economics, with our show Entrepreneurship and Black Wall Street Community. So I hope you will continue to join us this week for our Kwanzaa series here on the front page. And if you already have been, thank you so much for waking up and joining our series of conversations. Okay, so today, our show, as I previously mentioned, is day 3 of Kwanzaa, Ujima, collective work and responsibility. And the topic we will be addressing is empowering today's young black males. Now, according to Kwanzaa founder Dr. Malana Karenga, Ujima, or collective work and responsibility, means to build and maintain our community together and make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems and solve them together. And one of the first problems we need to solve is the plight of our young black males. When you look at society today, what would you say is the state of our young black boys and men? From being branded as thugs, criminals, and someone to fear, to being raised in a community of fatherless homes. In my humble opinion, today's black men and boys are targeted and burdened by systematic racism, bias, and a need to adhere to masculine and misogynistic norms. So with that, as a community, we have to stop and ask ourselves, just what type of black men and future fathers are we raising today? Case in point, the mass incarceration of black boys and men. According to blackdemographics.com, about 6% of working age black men, ages 18 to 64, are currently in a state or federal prison or in a municipal jail, which is 3 times higher than the 2% of all men in the same age group. What's even more concerning is that approximately 34% of all working age black men who are not incarcerated are ex-offenders, compared to 12% of all men, which means that they at one point in their lives have been convicted of a felony. Now, while these stats reflect black men ages 18 to 64, we have to know that they were all once little boys. So that begs the question, how did these men get here? We all know that black men are built to be kings and leaders, so why aren't more of them resting comfortably in their rightful thrones? So in reference to today's Kwanzaa principle of Ujima, as a community, as brothers and sisters, what is our collective work and responsibility when it comes to empowering today's young black males? So let's talk about it this morning on the front page. I'm going to introduce my absolutely fantastic panel of guests, starting with Dr. Darin Earley, who has served as the director of the Loyola Marymount University Family of Schools for 10 years. He is responsible for overseeing the daily operations of the Family of Schools, managing various programs, grant funding projects that support 15 partner schools, and serves as a liaison between the university and the local education community. Dr. Earley is also a part-time faculty member in the LMU Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, co-chairs the school's education partnership, and is a member of the SOE Academic Program Review Committee, which he serves on several external boards. Having worked as a secondary school administrator, classroom teacher, and human relations facilitator, Dr. Earley also has over 18 years of experience with the Los Angeles Unified School District. Please welcome my good friend to the front page, Dr. Darin Earley. You got to pull your mic to you, sir. How you doing?
Good morning, sis. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
We up wide and wake and
we
ready
up
to
wide
go.
and wake, ready to talk about empowering these black boys. Yes,
Getting it in. Yes, it's good to be here, Starlett. Thank you.
fantastic. Next, we have my big sister. Hi, Brickell.
Morning.
Dr. Brickell Quarles, who's here for Christmas, first because she lives in New York, where she has worked as part of the clinical team at Rikers Island Correctional Facility since 2004. After being employed at Rikers Island as a mental health clinician for a year and a half, she was quickly promoted to clinical supervisor and has worked in this capacity for the last 12 years. Dr. Quarles holds a master's degree in psychology, theology, and biology, and also holds a PhD in clinical psychology. Yes, she has 5 degrees. I just had to shout my sister out. Although theoretically trained, Daddy pushed education. Although theoretically trained in psychodynamic psychotherapy, Dr. Quarles approaches patients from a holistic perspective. She has a special interest in treating PTSD and its intergenerational imprint, and is currently writing a book that looks at the role of shame in perpetuating racism and white privilege. Please welcome my big sister, Dr. Brickell Quarles, to the front page. Morning, sis.
Good morning. Thanks for inviting me back.
Of course, I'm glad you could join us while you were here in town. And last but absolutely certainly not least is Mr. KAREEM Webb, who is a 25-year veteran of the restaurant industry. He is currently co-owner and operations partner of PCF, Restaurant Management, a Los Angeles-based Buffalo Wild Wings franchisee. KAREEM was exposed to the restaurant business at an early age. As a teen, he worked at one of his parents' McDonald's restaurants, where he was trained on all aspects of restaurant operations. With his leadership, the Buffalo Wild Wings franchisee group has successfully opened 3 restaurants. Did you hear me? This is a young professional here, y'all. 3 restaurants in the Los Angeles area, with 3 more in development. You guys have been to his location, I'm sure, on Crenshaw Boulevard. He has another one in Carson and Torrance, and they have consistently outpaced regional and national sales trends within the industry and have produced double-digit sales increases. Please welcome my good friend, Mr. KAREEM Webb. How you doing, sir?
I'm spectacular. Good morning, superstar.
So KAREEM, I'm gonna start with you. In your opinion, what would you say is the state of our young black boys today?
Man, what an interesting question. I think young black people, young black men are dynamic, energetic, by and large, hopeful, but far too often underloved.
Interesting. Elaborate on that. Who doesn't love these black boys?
The people that should. You know, they're not born, into what we would consider, I think, in American society, normal situations.
Okay.
Types of situations that lend itself to success in capitalistic democracy like the United States.
Okay.
I think, young people intrinsically come up on challenges, sometimes self-created, sometimes by your own biology and the lack of development in your frontal lobe. And you need love and guidance and community, healthy community, moral community.
Very good.
To help you travail life. And just far too often, our young people are not surrounded by the support mechanism necessary to be competitive.
Absolutely.
And that lack of competitiveness, lends itself to acting out, and our society is set up to take advantage of people who are not on their game.
Darin, what would you say?
It's funny that KAREEM used the word hopeful, because that's the first thing that came to my mind.
That's the first thing. So when you said that, right? I'm glad to know that they are hopeful.
Right, exactly. And hopeful from the standpoint of expectations. And I think that conversation around expectations go to high expectations in some spaces and low expectations. I think that our young black men, I think they are an untapped resource in our society, specifically in the African-American community. Years ago, I heard that, we raise our girls and we love our boys. And because we love our boys, oftentimes we don't equip our boys to do the things that are necessary. And that goes back to that conversation in terms of when you say unloved the term I'm using, love, is similar to being unloved, because you're not, you love them from a soft, warm, cushy, cozy kind of space, but you don't love them enough to push them to the spaces where they can grow. And that's when I say the untapped resources, the pushing them to the spaces where they can grow, identifying who they are and what they can be. And we'll talk more about that, but that's really important in terms of hopeful and an untapped resource.
And Brickell, you're in the belly of the beast. You're in Rikers. I'm sure your perspective is somewhat different, but what would you say is the state of our young black boys?
I would have to say, well, two things come to mind for me. Two words, actually. Crisis and confusion, but promise.
Okay.
I have to definitely throw that in there. You know, there's a lot of history of police brutality. You know, we've seen this over the years, and it's not stopping. You know, and where I work, there's a lot of influences of the gang violence. And individuals, and it's interesting you use the word, I think it was love?
Underloved, yeah.
Underloved. That's what I see, a lot of that. And it depends on if you're talking about the haves and the have-nots, because they have two different life experiences. But I think they're all searching for the same things. One, validation. Validation says, I am somebody. Two, respect. Respect means I matter to you. Three is love. And four, security. And security meaning that none of these other things are going to go away.
Scoop just to the mic just a little bit, sis.
The other three, validation, respect, and love, are going to go away.
Okay.
So depending upon whether you have these available in your life or you don't, you seek ways to get those things. And some of those ways land individuals in jail, unfortunately.
I talked about this in the monologue, or I mentioned this in the monologue. What type of men and fathers are we raising today? And what messages are they receiving about their roles in their homes and their families and in their communities? And where specifically, Darin, are they getting these messages about who they are as black men in the world today?
It's funny that you said it, because Brickell just talked about, you know, the different spaces that they may come from. And I think when we answer that question, often we think of it as us as a people being a monolith. Like it's just one dynamic from where we come. And so when we talk about what type of men, fathers are being raised and the messages, it varies. It varies from situation to situation. KAREEM and I were talking about, historically black colleges and just our experiences as historically black colleges, him at Morehouse, me at Howard. And our experiences were uniquely different, and they may have been uniquely different based upon what we brought to that space, and I think we can't undervalue those experiences that we bring. So now to answer to the question, what type are we raising? I think it depends on where we're raising. It depends on who they're being raised by. It depends on the context. I mean, because if you have a young man that's growing up in a predominantly African-American community, he's being raised with a certain set of experiences that produce a certain set of values. If you have one being raised where they're a minority in a space, then there's a different set of skills that they're gaining, but a different set of values also.
All right, KAREEM.
Yeah, I think, with every question, you have to define, the key word in the question,
right?
Which is, what does it mean to be raised? And so, I think a lot of our young boys are raising themselves. And it goes back to that, that word, and how would you define being loved? How does a young person experience love, and how do they find worthiness?
Okay.
Because it's your sense of self-esteem, to me, that drives your value system, what you would or would not do, what you would or would not be willing to risk, what you do feel like is a reasonable expectation for how you show up and your existence and your right to have or create in the world. And when left to your own devices, or when your entire, sphere of influence and surroundings does not equate to maybe what you see on your phone, on Instagram, or what you see on TV.
Absolutely.
You begin to question whether or not the quote-unquote good life is for you. And if it's not, then desperation sets in. If you are not surrounded by church, family, school, adults.
A village.
People you trust, can believe in above and beyond yourself, like all of us had in our parents, that said, listen, when you're questioning things, you've got example to look at that's going to go above and beyond what necessarily might be required of somebody to shower their love on you.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what our young people are not getting.
At the top of the show, I talked about the stats on the mass incarceration of black men, but our boys are actually, getting locked up more and more each year. So, Brickell, what are your thoughts on the, so I'm going to read some statistics after I ask you this question, but what are your thoughts on the school to prison pipeline, and what are the long-term effects of that?
To me, what is critical is education. And when I mean education, I mean educating them on black history, who they are as black men. because it matters. How you're raising your kids, just like you guys mentioned, determines what they're going to believe about themselves, their place in the world, and the things that they do to try to achieve those goals that you set for them. So to me, black men have to be educated on who they are as black men. There's a documentary that I saw recently called 1804, and it's about how Haiti got its independence. And when you see that and you see how we as strong people and the black men in that country, defended the Spanish, defended, the French to get their independence. But none of us, I wasn't taught this at UCLA.
No, absolutely not.
And so they need to hear stories like this. I think James Baldwin is required reading for every black man. Well, black people.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the school to prison pipeline is going to continue until we educate our black men on who they are and how strong they are and come together as a people to continue to validate.
Darin, I know you concur.
them.
Yeah, it's funny because I think in terms of who they are culturally, they need to understand that. But then when we actually look at the schools themselves, we have to ask the question. One is two things. I think it's a sense of belongingness that's lacking. Our young men don't feel connected to that space. And they don't feel connected to that space because the culture and the dynamic of the schools are not always embracing to them, and who they are. And so that's one issue. But the other part is just looking at schools. And since, even since Brown versus Board of Education, one of the unintended consequences was fewer connections that African-American children had in those spaces. And you have a lot of racial mismatch in schools. Wherever African-American students are, you're not going to see a lot of African-American teachers. And so consequently, those teachers are viewing them through a lens of the media. They're viewing them through the lens of what other people have told them about them. And they don't know these kids. And so the space itself produces hostility and consequently results in that.
I hear you over here, amen, and Kareem.
Yo, yeah, I'm amen. I mean, the brothers, listen, I sell fried chicken. These are doctors up in here.
But it's good, though. It's good. Got to feed the soul.
You're funny, man.
Okay, let me just quickly read just a couple of stats because I want to ask you just about incarcerated male youth, specifically black male youth. And these are some statistics from the Campaign of Youth Justice. On any given day, they report approximately 54,000 juvenile offenders are not living in their homes but are held in a residential placement facility like a juvenile detention facility, correction facilities, or in group homes or shelters. After their arrest, many youth are detained in a detention or another residential facility to await a hearing in juvenile or adult court, depending on how they are charged. While in and out of home placement facility, youth are separated from their community and their normal day-to-day life, forced out of school, jobs, and family life. 3/4 of youth in detention are held for non-violent charges. These youth are charged with property offenses, drug offenses, public order offenses, technical probation violations, or status offenses, which are crimes that wouldn't be crimes if they were adults, like running away or breaking curfew. So, Brickell, you are dealing with young boys. What age group?
16, 17, 18, and then adult men.
In the belly of the beast. Are many of them incarcerated for non-violent charges?
Yeah, those stats are correct. They're definitely correct.
And so what are some of the psychological effects that you've seen from and you've been there, 13 years now? So what are some of the psychological effects of youth incarceration?
Well, before I go into that, what I have to really stress is that parenting matters. What's going to determine whether someone ends up incarcerated or not is how you are training them. Because believe me, they are getting trained in jail because these officers are the parents in the jail. They're providing the structure, the security, they're providing the guidance, the food, everything that a parent would do, corrections officers are doing. So if your kids are not parented correctly, one, they hopefully would not end up there. But two, they would be strong enough to withstand what they're being told about themselves while they are there. And as far as the psychological effects, jail is a very invalidating environment. You're not going to get anything positive from a corrections officer who is looking at you as an object versus a human. So you end up coming out more insecure, more untrustworthy, or having difficulty trusting others.
Okay.
And PTSD is huge. PTSD is a very
it's not just for vets.
Misdiagnosed and undiagnosed disorder that I see in a lot of these young men. We call them ADHD or hyperactive when it's really hypervigilance. We call them angry and bipolar, when they've been traumatized and just can't control their, nervous system. So they're always on edge.
Okay.
So to answer your question, there's a lot of psychological effects: depression, anxiety, frustration, low tolerance.
Okay. We're at the top of the hour, and this is 102.3 Radio Free KJLH, Compton, Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Inglewood. In case you're just tuning in, I'm Starlett Quarles, and this morning we are celebrating Kwanzaa Principle for Day 3, Ujima, or Collective Work and Responsibility, with our conversation on empowering today's young black males. My guests include Dr. Darin Earley, Dr. Brickell Quarles, and KAREEM Webb. Brickell, you often talk about trauma. When you are talking about the incarcerated males that you work with, what types of traumas are some of them experiencing prior to them being incarcerated?
Anything from what we always hear, well, not always, but we hear a lot about physical abuse, sexual abuse, the usual traumas, but also just living in the environment that is violent. Witnessing kids get shot, witnessing robberies, being robbed yourself. So there's a lot of things that these kids are going through and surviving and having to put on a front to not express their emotions or acknowledge their emotions because they still got to survive. They can't show weakness because any sign of weakness, you're going to be a victim. And that's a good transition. Doreen, I want to go into this soundbite. I'm going to play this soundbite. When you're talking about them having to show this face, right, and put on this mask. I'm going to play a soundbite from a recent interview with Jay-Z conducted by the New York Times executive editor, Dean Beckwith. And in this excerpt, Jay-Z shares what he's learned in therapy about the anger and hurt felt by many of today's young black males.
What was that like being in therapy? What did you talk about that you had never acknowledged to yourself or talked?
I grew so much from the experience. But I think the most important thing I got is that everything is connected. Every emotion is connected and it comes from somewhere. And just being aware of it. Being aware of it in everyday life puts you at such an advantage. You realize that, someone's racist toward you. It's not even about you. It ain't about you. It's about their upbringing and what happened to them and how they led them to this point. Most bullies bully. It's happened. Oh, you got bullied as kids, so you're trying to bully me. I understand. Right. And once I understand that, instead of reacting to that with anger, I can provide a softer landing. And maybe, oh man, is you okay? I was just saying, there was a lot of fights in our neighborhood that started with, what you looking at? Why you looking at me? You looking at me? And then you realize, you think I see you. You're in the space where you're hurting and you think I see you, so you don't want me to look at you. And you don't want me to see you in such a vulnerable, you don't want me to see your pain. So you put on this shell of this tough person that's really willing to fight me and possibly kill me because I looked at you. You know what I'm saying? Like, so knowing that and understanding that changes life completely.
Was that a moment that came from therapy?
Yeah, just realizing that, oh my goodness, these young men coming from they're just in pain. You got to survive. So you go into survival mode. And when you go into survival mode, what happened? You shut down. Right. You shut down all emotions. Right. So even with women, you got shut down emotionally, so you can't connect. And then now all the things happen from there. Infidelity.
You can't connect because you can't connect because of the way you feel about yourself, you mean?
Yes. In my case, it's deep.
And I love Jay-Z. Jay-Z has had such a powerful voice. I love his new album, and I think he's turned a corner that many young black males need to hear. Music and entertainment is so influential in the black community. So, KAREEM, I want to ask you, share your thoughts on Jay-Z's comments about young black males' inability to show their hurt and pain and their need to shut down their emotions as a means of survival. And as a community, how can we effectively address this issue when we tell our little black boys not to cry?
Well, we can't. If we're going to tell them that, to not acknowledge their emotion and begin to ask the question, what does that mean?
So as a black man,
that's the question I like to ask.
So as a black man, were you in tune to your emotions? Were you allowed to cry? Did you feel like you couldn't show your pain?
Yeah, well, like Doc was talking about earlier, people grow up in different situations. So, mine was more of a diverse upbringing where I was one of the onlyest. And then you're asking yourself questions about validating yourself because you don't necessarily see a lot of people that look like you in the environments that you're in.
Very good. So, Darin.
I want to take a step back because when we were talking about trauma, the one thing that jumped into my brain, I listened to Jay-Z too, is that we don't spend enough time really talking about issues of abandonment. And a lot of our young men, they're feeling abandoned. They're feeling abandoned by the fact that dad may not be there. Dad may not necessarily have been active, but he was there. The fact that they've lost, in terms of death and things that happen in the community. Right. And that sense of abandonment, that produces in you an anxiety. That produces in you a feeling of, it's fear. And so when you say, the type of home, the role of a dad in a home is really to cover and protect and to guard and to shield their child as they're traversing this, this whole course of life. And so when you don't have that, then you feel like you have to put on that shell, and that shell says, don't cry. That shell says, don't be a punk. That shell says, man up, all those kind of things. And really, there's a place for that. But that's something that you grow into. I don't expect an 8-year-old to function in that capacity the same way I expect a 28-year-old to function in it. But that 28-year-old who's never had the chance to be an 8-year-old and learn the value of crying, then it's just anger because I don't know how to deal with that emotion at 28, and I've never had a chance to kind of grow through that.
Brickell.
And not only that, well, to take it to the next level, the fear is also shame. So you're ashamed that you don't have a dad in your life.
Exactly.
I've had a lot of guys tell me that fights started because they were jealous because their friend or whoever this other guy was had their father.
Yep.
I totally agree with you on that.
All right, so we're going to go to the phone lines. We have Michael calling in from Los Angeles. Hi, Michael. You're on with the front page. You have a comment or question for our guest?
Yes. I just want to say that I'm really happy to hear this conversation from KJLH, and I want to thank Stevie Wonder and the whole staff for bringing this up because this is way overdue. And, I've been listening to KJLH a long time, and this conversation should last a whole week.
Right.
Because black men have just been a target. I mean, even starting from your president. I mean, talking about black men, you walk down black streets and you're going to get shot. Dumb stuff like that being talked about, I guess I kind of led a sheltered life. I had 12 brothers and sisters raised by my father. Mother died when I was 9. And he raised 12 people by himself. And he was just an extremely good example. I mean, he taught us how to get out there and hustle and make money. I had paper routes. All my brothers and sisters, they went to college and they have good jobs. My kids have good jobs. They just learned how to hustle, and just make money out there. Honestly, you didn't have to do no stealing. You know what I mean? A lot of, and I wasn't the sharpest pencil in the box, but, I went to school. I worked for the aerospace. I made good money.
Well, it sounds like you had an absolutely fantastic upbringing, Michael, and I want to thank you for your contribution to our conversation this morning and for tuning in to the front page. We're going to go to another caller, David. David, you're on with the front page. You have a comment or question for our guests?
Yes. They mentioned that documentary a while back, and that just reminded me, has anybody watched BET lately? I mean, it is mostly just endless hours of black people being violent or clowns. And that's about it. They don't show any documentaries. Even a film like Panther, they won't even show it. But it's just endless hours of substandard drag or just being pacified with garbage mostly. And I see really all the way to notice, when it's supposed to be a black station.
Right, it's not anymore.
With garbage.
Right, because it's not even owned by Bob Johnson anymore. It's owned by Viacom. Thank you so much for your call. Darin, I want to go to you as a community. We're talking about collective work and responsibility. As a community, how do we begin to help our young black men think differently about who they are?
Sarah, that's a great question. And last night when we were at dinner, I was kind of thinking that through, with my family and some friends. We're guilty oftentimes of bemoaning the problem without identifying solutions.
Okay.
And I think one of the things when we think in terms of how do we begin, think of a metaphor in terms of building a house, and being successful and a productive citizen is the building of a house. And too often we tell our young men, build a house. We show them the blueprint. We talk to them about what they can do with this house. We give them a 30,000-foot view. But very rarely do we say, let me take you to Home Depot. Let me get you a hammer. Let me show you how to use a saw. Let me show you how, what a 2x4 is. So those basic skills that they need to really get to the place of success. I remember KAREEM told me this story a while back. I'm out you a little bit, bro, because he grew up in a house where, where his dad owned businesses. So he could have been on the front office side of it his whole life because his dad owned him. But one of the things he told me is that his dad, and correct me if I'm wrong, your dad had you mopping and cleaning and doing that hard work so that you understood what it looked like to be able, you had the skill set to be able to develop your own business. So when you walk into your stores now, yeah, you can count the money and do the marketing, this, that, and the other, but you can cook the food and mop the floors and clean the toilets too. And it's those skill sets. That's how we begin. We begin by giving our kids specific, tangible, practical skills.
All right. Darin, I want to come back to you. We're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation on empowering today's young black males. Right here on the front page of 102.3 Radio Free KJLH.
The Dialogue, the community voice of Southern California's young professional network. Relevant discussions about the thoughts, concerns, opportunities, and challenges faced by today's generational leaders. Real talk, real people. This is The Dialogue. The Dialogue with Starlett Quarles.
Welcome back to the front page. I'm your host, Starlett Quarles, filling in for Dominique DePrima this morning. And we are celebrating the Kwanzaa principle of Ujima, or collective work and responsibility, with our conversation on empowering today's young black males. I have an absolutely fantastic panel this morning. Dr. Darin Earley, Dr. Brickell Quarles, and KAREEM Webb. And during the commercial break, Darin, we were talking about, solutions and things that we can do as a community. And we're talking about it from, as KAREEM pointed out, a macro level, but let's talk about it from a micro level. So what are some of the solutions that someone can do today? Like you said, KAREEM, as soon as we get out of here, as soon as we wake up and had our coffee, what can someone do today to help with the plight of young black men and empowering them to be the kings that we know them to be?
So I'm back into it, and I think one thing is that we have to help young people develop a North Star mentality. And
North Star mentality?
North Star, shout out to Frederick Douglass, so that we look and they can identify where they want to be, how they want to get there, and then what they can use to get there. If it's role models, if it's guys like KAREEM, if it's people like Dr. Quarles, whoever they can identify and touch. I have young people who say they want to get into medicine. My first thing is just this: do you know a doctor? And if you don't, get on the phone. Just Yellow Pages. Call a doctor and say, hey, you know what? I'm very interested in your profession. Is there any way I can come in and talk to you? And people will talk you through this stuff, but we have to give kids the tools to do that. The second thing is just this: is that routines and rituals. Kids who go to college, typically the majority of kids who go to college, by the time they're in about the 5th grade, they have a routine for homework. Their parents don't have to come in every day and say, did you do your homework? Is your homework this? They have a routine. They've learned that probably from the time that they were little. And I think you said, KAREEM, in those middle class homes that are maybe 2nd and 3rd generation college, it's just a standard. It's what they do. So we have to help children develop routines and rituals of success. How do you get up? What do you do in the morning? What do you even eat for breakfast? All those kind of things. And then the third thing is the role of literacy. Literacy is huge. And KAREEM, and I know you're going to dovetail off this because we were talking about this in the break. When you think in terms of literacy, Frederick Douglass, the guy the owner, the slave master who owned Frederick Douglass, he said this. He said, teaching a slave to read makes him unfit to be a slave. Wow, look at that, right? Every slave rebellion was led by literate slaves. Then you move fast forward. When you think in terms of incarceration, as literacy goes up, the potential for incarceration goes down. So those are 3 real tangible: North Star mentality, helping them develop routines and rituals of success, and then also teaching them to read, having them read, giving them good information so that they not only have ideas, but is grounded in something that they can articulate.
KAREEM.
Know where you spend. If it's me, what can our listener do right now today who is, depressed by this conversation, by the reality of it? What can we do today before noon? Know where you spend your money. Support businesses that are developing young people. Know what is in your community and how local nonprofit.
Yeah, what are some of those nonprofits? I know you're working with some of them. What are some of the nonprofits out there really doing the work helping our black boys?
Oh, there's a lot. But in Inglewood right here, you have the Social Justice Learning Institute. You've got the Brotherhood Crusade I work closely with in the Crenshaw district and all throughout South LA. And there are a lot of other ones.
Right.
That do good work, but pay attention. Pay attention to the quality of the instruction wherever you are at your church. Is there one more thing that you can possibly get involved in so that you have the opportunity to come across and touch a young person and find out what's happening in his life and make just some bit of a small difference? Because you'd be shocked at how little contact can make a big difference, especially in the absence of all of the positive attributes that we've been talking about today.
Okay. Brickell, upon re-entry into society, I mean, what are some of the micro solutions that we as a community, as families, as teachers, what can we do to help empower young black males once they come back from being incarcerated?
There's an organization that is doing some work at Rikers, and I'm not sure if it's only on the East Coast or not, but they are giving young men suits. Colin Kaepernick is really involved in this organization. And actually, Colin Kaepernick came to Rikers Island to speak to the kids. But providing them with basics, you know, teach them how to tie a tie or learn how to make phone calls, because kids don't know how to make phone calls to an employer or how to get there. You know, they're very basic skills that we think that they already know how to do, but they're probably intimidated in doing. And coming from the jail system back into the community is very, you know, difficult for many people, particularly if they didn't have the skills going in. So, you know, just being a support, telling them what they're doing correctly, you know, and encouraging them, you know, letting them know that you're going to be there for them, that you're here to support them, and that, you know, you guys are going to make it through together. I mean, that's what this whole, is it Ujima? That's what it's all about, you know, making our problems their problems, and we're all solving the solutions together. So just teaching them exactly what you feel is right for them to do and showing them how to do it, not just relying on the fact that you believe that they know how to do it.
And so how crucial would you say is psychotherapy once they re-enter back into society?
Well, of course I'm biased. I think it's helpful. You know, I think, you know, we all got problems. And it's no shame in getting someone there to help you.
Which is why I think it's good that Jay-Z talked about him going to therapy. He's a role model to a lot of young black men. Darin, you talked about navigating in the public school system. How do we better teach our black boys how to navigate in a broken public school system?
First, we have to get out of this fear of failure. And I think even those who have gone on to college, a lot of our, and I'll just use this term, a lot of our millennials are afraid to fail, you know, and they don't understand what I call the bounce effect. I mean, they don't understand if you fail and you on the trampoline, it's really going to take you higher if you really, you know, learn the lessons that are there to be learned. The other thing is that, you know, and I think parents can do this, schools can do this, navigating the system requires their ability to kind of choose and make decisions. Brickell talked about, you know, them dealing with their problems and kind of helping them. Problem solving and problem solving skills, they're honed in the opportunity to actually solve problems. So if you never give a child an opportunity to figure something out, they'll never know how to figure it out. So you have to give them the skills. And then I think the last piece that is probably stands out to me is navigating that system is teaching young people their value, their worth, and then how to advocate for themselves.
Absolutely.
When they find themselves in a tight situation, how to have those conversations with one of the things that we do with our children, if they have problems, our high school children anyway, they have problems with their teachers, step one is email that teacher, go talk to that teacher. Copy us on the email. After that, if it doesn't work, then we come in as parents. But if they can learn to solve their things on their own, then I've equipped them to navigate this world and understanding going into the door of the school now, and this is the crazy part. Parents, please understand, schools are not there to educate your kids. You are there to make sure your kids get educated. And so if you don't equip them and if you don't push that and you just abdicate the responsibilities of schools, then we're going to get what we're getting.
KAREEM, you know, and I think that our issue is that parented kids graduate high school. Unparented kids don't graduate high school. So in California, we know the work that we've done through California Community Foundation, Bloom, etc. We learn, UCLA research, we learn that, you know, in California, 40% of black boys don't graduate high school. And then of the 40% that don't graduate high school, 90% end up in prison, not jail, prison. But if they graduate high school, black boys that graduate high school in California, only 10% go to prison. So we said, we could focus on one thing that's going to move the bar in terms of having our young people never be convicted and have to deal with the legacy of that and how that's going to show up throughout their life, more than likely, is get them to graduate high school. Get them to graduate with a plan, and hopefully there's college, at least 2 years, and then if we can get them to go to Fort, that's great. But if we want to talk about moving from 36% of our young people going to prison to only 10 right now today, if they just graduate high school.
It's huge. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a big trigger.
With so many of our black youth, and specifically with boys being raised by single moms, Brickell, start with you. Talk about the importance of positive male role models. I know you bring former incarcerated entrepreneurs into the system to talk to your boys. So talk about the importance if they don't have a father, because a lot of these boys are being raised in fatherless homes. So if they don't have a father, talk about the importance of a role model.
Yeah, that's I know,
and a mentor.
Having positive male role models is very important because at this point, once they get to Rikers Island, their role models are probably a local drug dealer or gangster who is, the head of their set or whatever they call it. And although mom is doing her best, surprisingly, a lot of these kids are really spoiled brats. Like you were saying, we
raise our girls and love our boys.
Right.
Yeah.
And I try to be both hard and loving at the same time because I think they need a little bit of both. And I'm wondering, because of the guys that I see, and they come in there with a sense of entitlement, they're spoiled, they want this, that, and another, not realizing that you committed a crime and you're in jail. And they're expecting us to treat them like mommy treats them. Give them this and that. So I agree that you have to love your boys, but you also have to say no to them.
We got to raise them.
You have to raise them and teach them that there are limits to what they can have, what they can do, and who they can be. And you have to do your best to guide them right, but realize that they are only going to listen to someone who they respect, and you might not be that person, or you might not be the one to be able to influence them for whatever reason. So you have to find someone who can have that influence on them that you respect and that they respect also.
I've found in business as an entrepreneur that employs a lot of young black men from an entry-level position. That means that they are competitive enough to do something other than entry-level. Otherwise, they wouldn't be working for me at the beginning. Is that because I'm African-American and look relatable, that there's a trust factor that exists. So I had the ability to say to them on day one, wait a minute, God loves you the same way he loves me, right? Therefore, I'm going to hold you accountable to competing in this environment so that hopefully you begin to exercise what I call the muscle of excellence. So if you can do it at Buffalo Wild Wings, you can do it in any other area of your life because you're worthy, right? And now I'm going to deal with you as a human being that is worthy of creating what you want and hold you accountable for that in this environment. That's what we need in every environment. That there are people that are looking at our young black men, regardless of circumstance, and say, I can hold you and love you and appreciate that you're experiencing pain and probably don't know how to talk about it yet, but at the same time, not let you off the hook from acknowledging your role in creating what you want to create for yourself and your life, and that will ever expand.
Nice.
Exactly.
Darin, I want to ask you specifically, in terms of role modeling, what should the black church be doing? What role should they be playing in helping to empower today's black males?
And I think that you can't look at it from a modern standpoint. We have to look at it historically.
Okay.
And the role of the historic black church has been significant in our community. Everything from accurate biblical teaching to, community and civic engagement. Now, I believe that right now there is a branch that has gotten really away from that. But there's a thread that still is doing that work, that's doing the work about the teaching and preaching of the gospel of Jesus Christ, but also making it tangible, putting that third leg to that. The one thing about church is that, it's level ground. Historically black church has been level ground where a child who may be coming from a single parent home where they're struggling to make it could be in the same space with doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, and this, that, and the other. So what it does, it demystifies success. It says, well, you know what? My uncle, my role model, KAREEM talked about role modeling, and role modeling is not somebody that you see. It's really somebody that you can touch, somebody that you can access, somebody that knows you, somebody who's going to encourage you. And I think in historically black church, when it's done the way I believe is the biblical manner, those relationships are established and that family is there. So if I have a question about college, I can talk to this person. If I have a question about getting off drugs, I can talk to this person. Reentry, I can talk to this person because they're all part of my family. There's not going to be judgment and things like that. So that's the role that the church can play, has played, and should be playing in this conversation.
KAREEM, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think Dr. Earley has hit the nail on the hammer, right? Especially with respect to the church. Then we've gotten to a space where we've got mega churches and people don't know people. It used to be, I grew up in a church where if you were acting up, and maybe you knew of a family that was splitting up or a dad wasn't around or whatever, and that son was acting up, somebody else's father stepped in, and the pastor would direct somebody to get involved in this kid's life, if not the pastor itself. But people knew people, so you really did have a village at the church. And that's how you can make the gospel live, is by making it show up in the quality of lives of his parishioners, right? And so single moms had a place to go to get support. And that's necessary.
So, Brickell, I wanted to piggyback on something that Kareem was talking about in terms of just the importance of entrepreneurship and teaching them entrepreneurship, because some of these guys, you know, they're making a lot of money on the streets in the underground economy, right? They have the entrepreneurial skills. They just need to make them applicable, right, above the economy. So talk about why you promote entrepreneurship at Rikers, and then you bring in speakers. You bring in speakers who were formerly incarcerated, and how successful is that when they see somebody who was incarcerated and that have, you know, had a second chance in life and take advantage of that second chance. So talk about the importance of teaching young black males entrepreneurship.
I teach entrepreneurship, one, because I think it's a viable means of building someone's self-esteem in their economic life, because money opens opportunity and experience opens opportunities as well. And when you have a felony, you are limited to certain jobs and certain opportunities. But if you have the skills to open your own business, then you can do a lot more than you can depending on someone to give you a job or an opportunity that, you know, you might not even want or might not even feel comfortable doing. So I teach entrepreneurship because I remember sitting with an inmate. This guy was nicely dressed. You know, that was back in the days when they allowed them to wear their own clothes.
They can wear their own clothes in prison?
Not now. Not now. They changed that because there was too much fighting going on.
I'm sure.
But at the time, he was dressed nice. He had a good personality. You know, he was a sharp brother. He was a drug dealer. And at the time, I was doing network marketing. I remember thinking to myself, if this guy wasn't in jail, I would want him in my downline because he can make a lot of money. And that's when I realized that drug dealing is much like network marketing. And that's what clicked for me. So entrepreneurship at that point came a tool that I wanted to use to help young men who were limited in opportunity because of their felony or because of their lack of education or because of other factors. I thought that entrepreneurship would be something that they can do. So I bring in people who have successfully started their own businesses. There's a guy who was a big-time drug dealer in New York. Went into prison and did maybe about 7 years or something like that. He got overweight and started working out in his prison cell and lost a whole bunch of pounds, like 70 pounds. So he started teaching other guys in the jail how to lose weight based on the workout that he created for himself. This guy got out, and now he has 2 gyms in New York City. One in Saks Fifth Avenue, where he teaches a jail-style, the same workout he built in his prison cell, a jail-style workout routine. And you have all kind of folks going there.
And I read about him, and he also did a TED Talk.
He did a TED Talk. I found out about him on TED Talk. So I went into his gym in New York City, introduced myself, met him, invited him up to Rikers Island. He came, met with the kids. Some of them, many of them, didn't really believe that he was successful in the way that he was.
And he's a millionaire. He's a businessman, like millions of dollars, like in the first couple of years.
Exactly. And this guy actually that day had an appointment to do a CNN interview that I had to rush him to after leaving Rikers Island. But the kids have a difficult time trusting people and believing that things are not possible, doing things the right way, particularly for someone that comes from, you know, the community, the hood. They had a hard time believing that he was real. And they gave him a hard time.
And Doc, that's why I think that black business specifically is so critical, especially businesses in the retail sector that can employ entry-level people. Mm-hmm. Because then you can put your arms around young people and say, okay, you don't have to have a lot of skills necessarily to do this job, but I can hold you accountable, begin to love you, begin to give you really some of the education that you probably don't already have,
right,
so that you can go on and begin to do other things. I know in my business is one of the most gratifying. I was at the TDE, Kendrick Lamar, Rihanna thing at the Nickerson Gardens last week, and I saw a brother that was my cook, got his own food truck. So he's out there, you know, Billionaire Burger Boys food truck.
Did you know that he's launched this business?
I knew, and we have been, you know,
shout out to Billionaire Burger Boys.
That's it. That we had been, you know, communicating on social media, and you know, and I knew I was going to catch up with him and support him at some place.
That is fantastic.
It's the young kids that have worked for us, that, you know, have clothing stores in Lamert that are doing things. And man, you know, you banged on us, but now everything that I've learned, the same thing I got from my father, what you guys got from your dad, that's what they need.
Well, tell me this though, Kareem. I mean, because that's spot on. And then I think in terms of what role of that process of you teaching them did love and patience and forgiveness even have to play? Because a lot of times that's what our young men don't have. They don't have that channel where they love, people are patient with them, and also are willing to forgive them.
Yeah, you know, and the interesting thing, his name is David. And the interesting thing about David was David always had big personality. almost kind of like uncontainable, right? So he started in the kitchen, and then I moved him to server, right? And so then he's server, but he's big personality, even sometimes too much from a server perspective. But because, you're approachable and you're always talking to your young people when you go in there, what's important to you, and man, and then you don't show up to work because you're going to Vegas one week. Come on, man, this, that, and the other, that. And what are the types of behaviors that you have to espouse in order to create what you want to create in your life, and being able to consistently be in a conversation like you would be with your kids or your nephews or anybody else that you're mentoring. And I didn't know what David left us with. It just popped up. Man, do you know that David is doing XYZ? Then you see David, and I got this video of him saying, because of what I learned at Buffalo Wild Wings, that's the goal. That's the goal, right?
I know you got warm fuzzies from that.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Because, the reason why I asked the Star, I'm sorry, is just because as we're sitting here, all of us in here are at least second generation college educated.
Yeah.
Okay? But then we have first generation that hasn't been part of their process. And we have second generation entrepreneurs here. All right. And so that's a process that you have to learn. And whoever is going to be your institutional agent, they have to be patient. They have to see your skills and love you beyond your faults. And that's the challenge with our young men. We're willing to say, I'm going to love you until you mess up, and then I'm cool on you. But if we stay steady, they're going to cycle back through. And what they learned is going to show up. We just got to keep deposit in. And that's what I think is the issue.
They definitely need a lot of patience, because if they are, one, afraid of failing and afraid that you're going to judge them because they're failing, they're going to simply go back to what they know and what they've been successful at, so they can continue to feel success. Exactly. Which is what we don't want, because that's what got them in jail in the first place.
That's right.
You want to piggyback on that?
No.
Oh.
Let the period be the period.
But what I did was ask you is, when you're mentoring these boys in terms of entrepreneurship and work, what do you teach them about money and long-term wealth creation? Does their mindset change?
If you get into a rich enough conversation, my job as an entrepreneur at Buffalo Wild Wings, in a business, you have to compete. We got to compete every day. So because I'm trying to help you, I cannot be less competitive, because the customer doesn't care. They just want their wings in a certain amount of time, a clean restaurant, this, that, and the other, cold beer, right? And so I got to create that first and foremost to continue the opportunity for all of us, the 400 of the young people that work for us in our 4 stores, right? So that's my number one priority. But along the way, every shoulder I touch or high five that I touch is looking into your eyes and acknowledging your humanity, your ability. This is not supposed to be forever for the majority of us, right? This is an opportunity to exercise your ability to be outstanding in this. And it's not fries at McDonald's or barista at Starbucks or, a cashier at the grocery store. It's being outstanding, being an outstanding human being, doing the right things for the right reason, right? And everywhere that all of us listening, all of us here show up, where we could inspire young people to embrace, being outstanding and doing the right things for the right reasons, is wonderful. And it's really golden when people haven't gotten it before, that haven't been exposed to that way of thinking and that possibility, because it's like a nuclear bomb goes off. It's so much more energized, when they take on that mindset.
I hope you are enjoying this conversation today that we're having on empowering today's young black males. But we got to pay some bills. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we're going to come back to our conversation right here on the front page of 102.3 Radio Free KJLH. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Starlett Quarles at The Dialogue, and I'm excited to announce that we will be returning this summer with a series of new shows addressing topics that are relevant to today's generational leaders. So join the conversation by subscribing to our YouTube page, following me on social media, or signing up on our mailing list at thedialoguela.com. Tune into The Dialogue with Starlett Quarles. Real talk, real people. Welcome back to the front page. If you're just now joining us, I'm your host, Starlett Quarles, filling in for Dominique DePrima, who will be returning to her rightful throne on January 8th. This morning, we are celebrating the Kwanzaa principle of Ujima, or collective work and responsibility, with our conversation on empowering today's young black males. My guests include Dr. Darin Earley, Dr. Brickell Quarles, and Mr. Webb. And, we were talking during the commercial break about David Lee. No, that's okay, about David Lee, your former employee, and he showed us a video, and he does have an absolutely fantastic personality of the Billionaire Burger Boys food trucks. And one of the things that he asked you, how do you do this political stuff? So what I love about your exposure, his exposure, is that they're understanding the connection between entrepreneurship and the power of being civically engaged, right? The power of having a relationship with a politician. So talk about that. Talk about, you know, him coming to you and the result of him asking you to connect with, is it Herb Wesson?
Yeah, it's Herb's office.
Okay, what happened? Tell us that story.
So David came to me and said, man, he worked at the Buffalo Wild Wings on Crenshaw, so oftentimes Herb or his staff or Marquise and his staff or whomever, Sebastian, they'll come into restaurants and hang out, have meetings, or, it's also a place for folks to do other types of political gatherings or whatever. So it's a convening space. So all of our team that work at that restaurant is kind of used to that and would see that. So he called me and said, man, what's the value of that? Why do you do that? Why do you spend time doing that? Curious, because now he's an entrepreneur.
Nice.
So I explained it to him. He went and met with Darin, who's Herb's chief of staff, and got with Herb. And then the brother called other young African-American food truck entrepreneurs together and created their own food truck festival in Leimert Park.
I love it.
So they had the first one about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, and they'll be doing it monthly, and it's going to grow. DJ out there. The council office is involved, therefore Southwest Division of the LAPD is involved, and they got security, and it's the right thing to do, and they're being rewarded by civic engagement.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. We're going to go to a caller. We're going to go to Devin, I believe, from Los Angeles. Hi, Devin. You're on the front page. You have a comment or question for our guest?
Yes, good morning. Yeah, I remember when I was a little boy, we had the Boy Scouts, the Cub Scouts, we had the big brothers and the big sisters, and because my mother we didn't have a father in the house, and that was our role models, and also some of our teachers. That's what you really need, the basis to get started from the education point of view. What's going to happen is that, unfortunately, these doggone kids get a chance to see this garbage on TV, these rappers that's degrading women, talking about drugs, talking about, you see guns in the videos, you see them talking about making so much money. Then you have children that they say, why would I have to go to college when I can get $2,000 and $3,000 in one day? This is really a sad situation. And then on top of that, you have the haves and the have-nots. I've been on the bus before with my girlfriend, dressed pretty nice, and other blacks would look at us like, well, who we supposed to be? Are we acting like we white? It's very uncomfortable, and the white man, he don't really care now. He really wants to extinct us, and we better wake up real quick because he's getting out of control, and it's really fast.
Okay, thank you so much. So, Darin, I want to ask you in terms of, and thank you, Devin, for your call, because that was a great transition to my next question. In terms of their social influences, how do we begin to combat and mitigate the impact of the images and the messages that our young black boys are receiving about themselves in the music and in media?
I think those of us who are in what Dr. Boyce would call a talented 10th, we can't be afraid of our folks. We can't look at our folks and say it's us and them. We have to say it's us, and that's really huge, because once we get that mentality in terms of it's about us, we begin to approach those conversations a little bit differently. But I think in terms of where we're going, as we're having conversations with, and I'm sorry, Star, I lost it for a second. Repeat the second part of that question
Just
again.
in terms of the impact of social media, how do we combat that? Just the messaging, the images.
See, the funny part is just this. There's a narrative out there, but then there's also a counter narrative. We have to find and expose our kids to the counter narrative. For me, I love hip hop, right? And so I recently, I know all you guys saw because it went viral. Black Thought from the Roots, he had this 10-minute freestyle, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's like amazing. I mean, it's articulate, it's raw, it's intelligent, the whole thing like that. Now, we can have our kids, well, not we, but, kids that listen to cats like, Lil So-and-so or Lil Jon, Lil Uzi Vert, all these kind of cats, right? Who just, But then at the same time, you got a cat like Black Thought that's really kicking some, real hip hop. In order to do real, you gotta be well read. You gotta be articulate. You gotta understand world issues, geopolitics, all that kind of stuff to bring it into your music.
Or you could be K-Dot right now today.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. So exactly, and that's a great example. So with that, it's really important that we take time to expose our kids to the counter narrative of social media. Yeah, you got Facebook and Twitter. That's cool. Instagram. But then the question, who are you following? For me, my conversation with kids and adults alike, like on Twitter, who are you following? You want to be a doctor. You want to be a successful entrepreneur. Are you following any of them? Are you listening? Do you know what a TED Talk is? Have you watched any of those? I got ADD, and I'm not legit. I ain't been diagnosed, but I can't do. I can't do a 30-minute TED Talk. But there's a whole lot of 6-minute TED Talks that have literally changed my thinking on a lot of things. So find your niche, find your space, and use social media. Don't let social media use and absorb and paint you into a corner.
KAREEM.
I love it. I love challenging young people to embrace their own curiosity. You know, again, it comes back to a sense of worthiness. Then you can begin to ask the question, what do you think about? Because now your thoughts have value, right? And you're not afraid to talk about your thoughts. And when you begin to talk about your thoughts and be around other people who are talking about theirs, and yours aren't as developed, you know, and then you begin to become curious about getting different information. So it's also exposure to environment. If I'm sitting around people and all we're talking about is the Kardashians, then that's all I'm going to be interested in. But if I get into an environment where we talk about building our communities, developing our communities, gentrification, what's happening on the Crenshaw line, you know, how can I get involved in a legitimate business? Then you're going to be around people that are going to lend itself to those types of conversations so that you can be curious and get beyond entertainment in your phone to let me spend some time enriching myself.
And the funny part, Star, you've seen it with some of the work you've done with the kids that we have, and KAREEM has seen it, because one thing about this whole entrepreneurship thing, I think you got to really be available. And this brother right here, I got to give a shout out to KAREEM. Whenever I've called this dude, Star, you too, whenever I've called you guys about doing something with kids or community, you have made yourself available. And I think that's a key part of making that change. Not just being out there so people can see, but making yourself available so people can touch. But to your point, in terms of conversation, don't think for 1 minute that middle school and even elementary school age kids, African-American young men, can engage in these conversations. They have ideas. They have thoughts. We're just not engaging them. And like KAREEM said, once they're in the room and the conversation is flowing, intellect is a weird thing, man. You step up to where you rise to the level of the water. You know, what do they say? Rising tides lifts all ships. That's really what happens. And so we can't sell them short. They can have these conversations.
Brickell.
I read a book by Ellis Coles. It's called Envy of the World. And it talks about how black men are the envy of the world. There's a lot about their culture, a lot about who they are that certain people envy. And I don't think millennials, if that's the right one, the hip-hop generation, I don't think they realize how influential they are as a group.
Well said, sis.
And I started a new hashtag. This has been on my mind for some time, and I'm going to put this out there for other people to do. We have done a lot of things and have contributed a lot to society that we started. And for instance, dropping the mic. When I see commercials now with people dropping the mic, like the Verizon commercial, guys dropping the mic, we started that. And there's a lot of other things that we started. My brother was showing me this documentary on the history of hip-hop. There were thousands and thousands of people in the crowd, and most of them were white kids.
Today.
But we started that.
In the Nickerson Gardens last week.
Was a lot of white folks?
What?
So the hashtag that I want to start, because if we want to communicate and have a conversation and have kids be a part of the conversation, we have to use what they're using. And social media is that.
Okay.
So the hashtag that I created, I believe it's hashtag we did that.
Hashtag we did that. I'm doing it right now. We did that.
So when you see something on a television commercial or you recognize something historically that we are responsible for, you know, that's our trend. We did that. Hashtag we did that.
Hashtag we did that. I'm putting that on a t-shirt, and I just tweeted it for the first time. Shout Brickell said it here. Dr. Brickell Quarles started off the hashtag we did that. KAREEM.
Well, I'm wearing my Angela Rye We Built This for Free sweatshirt in that theme right
now. Darin, thank you for acknowledging the work that KAREEM and I do with youth. And you know, and Brickell, you know, you also know as well, you know, you can't save every youth, right? There are some kids who just don't want to act right, who just aren't, you know, following the rules. What do we do with those kids? How do we still reach out to that young black boy who's hard-headed, who don't want to hear nothing, who is going in and out of the system and not learning his lessons? So I'm going to ask you guys, how do we save him, Darin?
Two things. One is that I don't think it's our job to save. I think it's our job to equip. Like when we talk about empower, you give kids the skills so that they feel empowered. Empowering, you can give somebody the keys to a car, but if they really don't understand, they're going to wreck the car. But if you give them the skills, then it's theirs. But now, the other thing we have to understand when we say they don't want to get right, it's a brain development thing. I mean, if we forget the human brain does not fully develop till about 25, 26. Am I right, Psych?
Yeah.
So Dr. Brickell, you know, and so the deal is just this, is that because the human brain does not develop, I can't look at a 15-year-old that is stuck on stupid and say, that's what you're going to be. I can't. He has a whole decade of maturation experiences and things that are going to change him. And many of us, when we may have seen a kid, you know, growing up, and then we see him 5, 6, 7, it's like, dang, he really matured. Yeah, they've really matured. So I think you continue to dump. You continue to deposit. You continue to do all these things and let time. It's just like the sharing of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You don't know who's going to come to faith in God, but you give them the gospel.
That's exactly right.
You know, the Bible says one man waters, one man plants, but God gives the increase. And it's the same thing. We continue to invest in their lives and then allow time to show us whether or not there's a return on that investment.
Before I go to Kareem, how can people find you?
It's real simple. Darin.early@gmail. Ain't no website. No, I'm kidding. No. If you go to the LMU Family Schools website and hit me up, it's Darin, Darin.early, EARLEY. You can catch it at lmu.edu or at gmail.com, or just Google me, whatever. I'm out there.
Kareem.
Yeah, I think that we show up the way that we want to show up because that's the way that we want to show up without being attached to an outcome. You know, if we're attached to an outcome, then the outcome will modify our vigor and consistency versus just be who we're called to be, because that's who we're called to be, and don't be attached to an outcome. So keep putting out the love. I'm not looking for the outcome for one specific individual. That will or won't happen. I'm not attached to that.
How can people find you?
At KAREEM Webb everywhere, just Instagram, Twitter, whatever. At KAREEM, KARIM Webb.
I do got a Twitter account. My bad.
All right, Brickell, I'm going to give you the last 20 seconds.
Okay. I think what we need to do is implement agape love. You know, we have to be unconditional in loving, our young men. But we also have to exercise tough love.
Yes,
Some people, I say this all the time to my staff, some kids are going to have to learn the hard way. So I think we have to exercise tough love and agape love.
And how can people find you, Twin?
Twitter is at Urban Leap, URBANLEAP, or on Instagram at Urban Leap NYC.
Thank you for tuning in today on the front page and all my guests. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for Ujamaa, Collective Work and Responsibility, with no, that's not what it is. But we're talking about entrepreneurship in Black Wall Street. Till tomorrow, signing off as my mama's child and my daddy's baby girl.